Into here. So if at any point you feel like you can't see quite well, feel free to come up. I'm not going to pick on you or throw anything at you or spray you or smash a watermelon or anything. Okay, so I want to start with sharing a parable about a teacher and a student that were walking down a riverbank. And as they were walking down the riverbank, they notice a man floating down the river who has clearly fallen in and is calling for help. So the student immediately jumps in, swims over to the man, grabs him, and drags him over to the shore and pulls him to safety. And about the time that they are finished resuscitating him, checking, making sure he's okay, they notice another one coming down the river. And so immediately the student jumps right back in, swims over, pulls that guy out, back in to get another one and pulls it out. And as he keeps going back and forth and is starting to really get tired and need some help, he notices his teacher, his mentor, walking off and going up the bank of the river further. And he yells to him and says, "Teacher, where are you going? I need help. There's too many people floating down the river. I can't save them all." And the teacher turns around and yells back and says, "I'm going to find out why so many people keep falling in the river." So much of the time that doctors are spending is just constantly chasing one crisis after another, and so very little of the attention that our healthcare system puts into anything is looking at why are we keep getting so sick? Why is it that 20 years ago the US was ranked the 12th healthiest country, and then it went to the 15th, and now the 37th, and we keep sliding further and further in the wrong direction? For the very first time in history, we've got scientists predicting that the life expectancy is going to start going down here in the United States. Not the rest of the world, not everywhere, just here in the United States, predominantly because of the problem that we're dealing with, obesity. So I recognize that this is a problem that we've got to start going up to the head of the river and figuring out why so many people keep falling into the river and how do we stop that instead of trying to save one life at a time. And so of course, the real reason that we keep falling in the river, so to speak, is because of our lifestyle choices, right? It's what we're choosing to eat. It's not what we have to eat or what we're forced to eat, it's what we're choosing to eat. It's how sedentary we are and how we choose to be sedentary. It's the amount of stress we choose to accept and allow in our lives that are why we're in this position and predicament that we're in. So I saw and recognized that it's the lifestyle choices that we make, and that we got to start doing something about that, because we get great results with chiropractic care, helping people to recover their health, but I'd sure rather help people to not lose it in the first place. Try to turn things around for the next generation instead of just trying to pull people out of the river one at a time. So the best system I was able to find for how to do that was called the Creating Wellness System. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. So in case you're not already familiar with how bad things have gotten, we've got 70% of all chronic diseases and illnesses that are just strictly lifestyle choices and are totally, completely preventable. Oncologists, cancer researchers, and surgeons all absolutely agree and unanimously recommend that we could eliminate 60% of all cancer through diet changes alone. They also say that we could eliminate 60% of all cancer through exercise changes alone. Obviously, those two add up to more than 100%, because some of the cancers, it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you just do something good for yourself, you can actually have a profound impact. We've got obesity reaching epic proportions here. 1 in 5 adults is considered obese, so 20%, 50% are overweight. I think that's actually probably an old stat. I saw one that said 60% of us are overweight, and a third are now considered obese. And we even see this trend happening in our children. We're seeing that about 20% of our children are obese, and at least a third of them are overweight. Remember, I would think it was probably the same for most of you when you were kids. When I was a kid and I was in elementary school and we hadn't really learned very good manners yet, we had the fat kid in class that we picked on. But it was just that, it was the fat kid. And the reason we picked on him was because he was the one that was different. We don't have the fat kid in class anymore. They're all showing some issues and challenges with weight. And so I don't guess they're probably getting picked on because they're not different anymore, but unfortunately, if they're already having weight issues that early in life, what's it going to be like when they do hit 40 or 50 and it becomes so much more difficult to do things about it? The average American sedentary 93% of the day. We get more food from McDonald's than from pretty much any other one source. And we see that 1 out of 3 kids who've been born in the last 13 years are going to develop type 2 diabetes, which is entirely lifestyle oriented. It's all about what we eat that affects whether we wind up with diabetes or not. Type 2 diabetes, I should specify. And we see that we're eating almost half of all of our meals outside of the home. According to the Journal of the American Medical Association, we've got approximately 7% of our kids these days who are feeling that they are unable to do everything they should be able to do with chronic illnesses like asthma, allergies, things of that nature. Whereas if we go back just to 1960, it was a third of that, less than a third of that. So we're seeing a pretty dramatic rise in chronic illnesses in our kids, affecting 15 to 18% of kids, and that's not a complete estimate, Harvard suggests. We've got all kinds of deceptive marketing that we're being faced with, telling us that Lucky Charms is a good source of calcium and vitamin D, and we all hear that that's important for our kids. They need to get calcium and vitamin D, and that's true. They just don't need to get gobs of sugar and green number 20 and red number 5 and all that kind of garbage along with it. There's plenty of healthy sources of calcium and vitamin D we could be going for. Here in North America, we're consuming 31% more packaged processed foods than we are fresh foods. This is very, very different than the rest of the world. There's a term called the U.S. healthcare disadvantage, which basically states that in spite of the fact that we have a much bigger, much more advanced, much more developed, and much more utilized healthcare system here in the United States, we seem to get much less of a return for it than they do in most of the rest of the world. And certainly one of the major reasons is in most of the rest of the world, they're going to rely predominantly on fresh fruits and vegetables, and processed packaged foods are going to be a very rare occurrence for them. We've got so many people who are convinced that it's not good to give your kids Coke, but Diet Coke is okay because it doesn't have any of the sugar, except for that the actual research finds that if you drink even just 2 cans a day of Diet Cokes, it increases your waistline by 500%. You cannot lose weight by using diet products. It doesn't work. The artificial sweeteners will cause you to gain more weight and consume more calories every single time than if you actually drank the regular stuff. I'm not advocating you go with a regular Coke either, but if you're going to treat yourself, if it is in fact a special occasion and you're going to give yourself that every great once in a while treat, go for the regular stuff. It's going to be much, much better for you than the stuff that's diet. And if you can actually find a Coke that's made outside of the United States, then it's even better because they use actual cane sugar instead of a high fructose corn syrup. The type of exercise that we're all being told is the stuff that we need to do, the aerobic exercise, turns out, oops, we've given you some bad advice there. That's been hurting us in all kinds of ways. Not that exercise is a problem, but just that constant cardio, that long aerobic workout stuff is not doing as much good for us as it could. We even have something called a mental diet, meaning what are you putting into your head? And of course, the news seems to be almost all bad news, doesn't it? And I don't know if any of you saw the movie Bowling for Columbine, but one of the things that he discusses in that is that if you go to Canada and you watch the news in Canada, it's not all bad news. The countries are not really all that different. If we're at war, Canada's generally at war too. Yet somehow they find good news to put into their news. And it's not that we don't have any good news here in the United States, it's just that our media realized good news doesn't actually keep people glued to the TV. And therefore they don't get to make people watch those advertisements, and they can't charge as much for the advertisements. But bad news, that gets you afraid. And if you're afraid, you'll stay tuned because you got to see, what do I got to worry about next? Another thing that nobody's talking about is, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people are hearing about, is alkaline diets versus acidic diets. And the alkaline diet causes a tremendous increased risk of almost any disease process you can name. We see that there's still a tremendous connection, 70% between stress and heart attack. Think about how much you hear about cholesterol and its impact on heart attack. It's not even a fraction of 70%. It's about a 16 to 24% increased risk of heart attack when you have high cholesterol. Yet that's the only thing anybody wants to talk to you about anymore, because of course we've got a prescription for that. Another major factor is that here in the US, we so much more rely on sickness care instead of health care. Here's what I mean. Imagine for a moment you go to see your medical doctor. You go in and you say, "Doc, I feel great. I have got like excellent health, tons of energy. I sleep like a baby. I hardly ever get sick even though everybody else around me is coughing and sneezing and hacking all the time. I got great digestion, good bowel regularity. I mean, everything is just really, really good with me. And I want to stay this way. What can you do to help me stay this way?" What do you think your doctors would tell you? What do you think? Yeah, keep doing what you're doing. Thanks a lot, Doc. You mean I just waited like an hour and a half out in your waiting room and another 45 minutes for you to finally show up to tell me keep doing what I'm doing? You see, folks, they've got nothing to offer you until you get sick. You've got to get sick first before you fit into their system. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that once you're sick, it's not a good system. What I'm saying is that if your goal is to be and stay healthy, you can't use a system that is there for you when you get sick to achieve that goal. It would be like saying, I want my car to last as long as possible. I want to try to get 300,000 miles out of my car. So my goal is to change the oil every time the check engine light comes on. And I'm going to rotate the tires every time one of them goes flat. And of course, you've got to change the spark plugs and do tune-ups just as soon as it starts to backfire. We wouldn't expect to get very good results out of taking care of our cars that way, yet that's the exact way we all choose to take care of our bodies. Almost across the board in America, the goal is to see how very little you can spend on your health. But with our cars, we spend on average about $2,000 a year just maintaining them. I'm not talking about putting gas in or paying the insurance. I'm talking about just doing the oil changes, the tire rotations, replacing the timing belt before it actually breaks, because it costs a lot less to do it that way. The stupid thing, in my opinion, about that is that no matter how well you take care of that car, you're going to have to buy a new one anyways. It's not going to last the rest of your lives. But you only get one body. You can't go out and buy a new one, no matter how much money you got available to you. So we ought to be caring for our health, not for our sickness. And there are plenty of ways to do that. It is, of course, predominant lifestyle changes, but there are also doctors out there that are really wellness-based doctors. Chiropractors, acupuncturists, naturopaths, homeopaths. You can go to any one of those and say, I feel great, I feel excellent, I want to stay this way, or if it's possible, maybe even get a little bit better. And the chiropractor, the acupuncturist, the naturopath, the homeopath, they can say, great, I can help you out with that. We can take a good thing and we can make it great. We can take great health and we can make it excellent. There's always a way to improve and tune and peak perform. So, how in the world does anybody navigate their way through that process? Because there's nothing but chaos out there in the marketplace, folks. You got one group that says, whatever you do, don't eat a carbohydrate. It's high protein, it's high fat. You get another guy out there who swears, no, whatever you do, you got to stay away from fat altogether. Go vegetarian, only carbohydrates, and everything in between. You got some people who say you need to do at least an hour of cardio 3 or 4 times a week, and other people who say never do any cardio. You want to do sprints and you want to do interval training. So it's no wonder that the average person can't seem to find a way to succeed through this mess, because it is just that, it's a mess. So in creating wellness, we started very first with the basic premise. We hear this term wellness all the time. Everybody's using it. You can look in the yellow pages, you can find the Foot and Ankle Wellness Center. I have no idea what you could do to a foot or an ankle that would improve your overall wellness, but they're just obviously jumping on the bandwagon, right? Everybody wants to be part of that whole wellness movement because that's where the dollars are going. So, how do you define wellness? Now, it's been a couple of years since I checked, but just about 3 years ago, if you picked up an actual physical paper dictionary, you couldn't find the word wellness in it. You could go online and you could find a wide variety of different definitions of wellness. I could not find one that was any different from the definition of health. They were using the words interchangeably. However, they're not interchangeable. There's a very profound difference between health and wellness. So in creating wellness, we started very first with saying, what is the difference? How do we define wellness? So we said that wellness is the degree to which we experience health and vitality in any dimension of life. Because health really only defines the degree to which you're experiencing vitality in the physical dimension of life. Maybe you might make a stretch and say the mental dimension, but certainly not the financial, certainly not the social or the spiritual. Can't be the spiritual because, of course, remember that our medical profession denies the existence of a spirit across the board, that you are just the result of a couple of random chemical interactions and a whole bunch of time. So we said that it's multiple dimensions. And so what really distinguishes wellness from health is that if you can't walk without tripping over your own feet, that's not a health problem, but it is a wellness problem. If you can't seem to make responsible decisions about how to spend your money, that's not really a health problem, but it is a wellness problem. So in wellness, we go above and beyond just the physical dimension. We become much more inclusive about your overall quality of life. And then again, it is about that there is no capacity limitation. You can be infinitely more and more well than you were before. Because think about it, isn't this what you're already seeing in certain ways? Meaning that when you were 5 years old, did you have the capacity to coordinate driving a car? Could you possibly have done that at 5 years? Even if you're like really tall and you could have seen over the steering wheel and reached the pedals? You just wouldn't have had that. But then at a certain point, you got to where you could do it, not real well, but acceptable enough that they'd give you a license. And then now at this point of life, you can certainly do it a whole lot better. In fact, so well that a lot of times we get from point A to point B and we realize, I have no idea how I got here. Like, you're just on autopilot. I can do it without even having to concentrate on it. Okay, so we talked about this alkaline acid thing. So I want to make sure you guys have some things you can actually take home with you and make actionable right away. So the kind of foods like this, your fruits, your vegetables, these tend to alkalize you. They raise your pH up. Ideal human pH should be somewhere in the neighborhood of about a 7.4. So if you can remember from the science class, 7.0 is neutral. Anything above 7 up to 14 is alkaline or base, and anything below 7 is acidic. If you go around and you actually measure people's pH of their body, which we would actually do that as part of this Creating Wellness system. We'll do that one Tuesday night as a group. We'll each take a little litmus test and check to see what our saliva's pH is. Most of us are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 6.7, 6.8. So instead of being slightly alkaline, most of us are slightly acidic, and that acidic environment changes how things work inside of your body. You can't carry out every chemical process that you normally would, even though you might have all the right chemicals there if the pH is not right. So these kinds of food are alkalizing. They help to get our pH up, but of course, certainly a little bit of the meat that they're trying to show right there, but much more the grains. All grains, pick one, anyone, I don't care. Grains all have a strong acid called phytic acid in them. And that phytic acid is not a super strong acid, but grain is so prevalent in our diet, not only between eating things made from whole grains like breads and pastas and things like that and just corn on the cob, but all of the things that have had corn starch, corn flour, corn syrup, and rice syrup, and all that kind of stuff added to it. You're going to get that phytic acid with it there as well. So like I said, one Tuesday night as part of one of our Wellness Club meetings, we will actually check our pH and see how we're doing. And then at the end of the whole 90-day challenge, we can check again and see how things have come along and how you've done with that. Also want to point out, and we will talk about this in a lot of detail in the whole 90-day challenge program, there isn't a diet for you and a different one for you and a different one for you. I hear this all the time that there's not one right diet. I disagree with this wholeheartedly, and so does the rest of nature. There is one right diet. Think about this. Can you think of any other animal out there where some of the members of that species eat leaves, other ones eat bugs, other ones attack animals and are predators? Or do all giraffes eat leaves? 100% of all giraffes eat leaves, right? And 100% of all cows eat grass. You got one?
Birds.
Okay. Which will eat what?
Well, we got some birds that eat insects. But you got eagles that eat meat, red meat.
Okay.
And then you got robins that eat crickets and small insects and stuff like that.
You made one small little mistake there. I said species, meaning that an eagle is a different species from a robin. They're in the same family, yes. Okay? But they're different species. So, diet is species-wide and species-specific. And as humans, we are all part of the same species. Yes, we have different races, but we're still all the same species. And all humans should eat the same diet as well. By the way, you can tell a lot about what that diet should be by looking at any animal's teeth, meaning that you don't see sharp razor incisors on a cow. You don't see flat, gnashing molars on a lion. You can tell a lot about what something should eat by the type of teeth that it's got. And of course, as humans, we've got some sharps and we've got some dulls because we need a combination of meat and of vegetables. We want to make sure we get all the different colors of the rainbow. What gives any fruit or vegetable its color is an antioxidant. And we need not one type of antioxidant and getting a whole bunch of them. We need lots of different antioxidants. Just like if you were going to go listen to a symphony, it would not be very beautiful music if they just had 800 French horns. But if we have a nice balance of some French horns, some violins, some trombones, some trumpets, and so on, we get some pretty beautiful music. And the same is true with our nutrients. We need variety and diversity. And so we want to make sure that on a day-to-day basis, we're getting not just a bunch of green or just a bunch of red, but a nice variety. Okay? We want to make sure we're getting those predominantly uncooked. Heat damages nutrients. So we've heard, of course, that you can boil all the nutrients out of your vegetables in the water. And if that was really the only problem with it, then I'd say no big deal. Just drink the water when you're done and it'll be good. Except for that, the heat damages the nutrients, so now they're not useful to your body anymore. So you want to get the majority of them raw. Of course, not eating too late. I would disagree with this one here. I would say a lean source of protein every meal is too much. As humans, as hunter-gatherers, which we have been for almost all of our time on Earth, we would not have had enough success at hunting to get meat at every meal, let alone even every day. We would have probably gotten meat maybe once a week or so. I don't know if any of you have ever tried hunting. I tried it for my very first time last year. I went out there with this high-powered rifle and a scope that I could see 3 miles, and I got camouflage, and I'm hiding up in a tree, and I got all these advantages that hunter-gatherers wouldn't have had. I didn't even get to see a deer, not once, never saw one. So how in the world would these guys have had meat at every meal? Seems kind of unlikely. And we are just simply operating off of their DNA, meaning that you have to go back 40,000 years in history to find even a 0.2% difference in our genetic code. So the best way to be and stay healthy, give your body what your DNA is expecting to see. That is without a doubt the easiest rule for how to be and stay healthy. We do need certain supplements these days, though, because there's certain things we just can't do anymore, meaning that modern agricultural techniques have changed the amount of nutrient in our food. So even if you were to eat all fruits and vegetables all the time, you still can't get quite as much nutrient as your body really could use. I wouldn't say need, meaning you could get the minimum, but you're not going to get the maximum by just eating nothing but fruits and vegetables, because when you pick something so far before the ripening process that you can ship it from Chile all the way up here to the US, and all the time it spends in boxes and trucks and on shelves before it finally makes it into your house and then you finally consume it, well, there's certainly a lot of nutrient that couldn't go into it. Probiotics is another thing that we would have all gotten with every single meal once upon a time, when we would have picked things right off of the plant and put it right in our mouth without boiling and microwaving or baking it to death. And omega-3 fats, again, modern agricultural techniques have made it to where none of the animals that we do eat produce much of any omega-3 fats anymore, except for fish, and only if it's wild fish, and those have become fairly toxic, so it's not so good to eat too much of that anymore. So these are the 3 and the only 3 supplements that I suggest and recommend. And we will spend a good bit of time talking about those as part of the Creating Wellness programs in terms of what's the best one and best sources and what to look for in them. Of course, we want to make sure that we need to get enough water. Sorry to disappoint, the Starbucks, even though it's made with a lot of water, it's not all that hydrating. Okay, we will talk more specifically about the best exercise programs, which is going to be an interval training and the right ins and outs of it to be able to maximize the benefits that you're going to get from it. But I would absolutely encourage and recommend moving away from the traditional cardio stuff and towards an interval training program. And like I said, we'll get into a lot of the details about how to maximize the benefits of that. They give one little example here. There's lots of different ways that you can do it. The basic concept is you want to get your heart rate to go up and then down and up and down and up and down instead of getting it up and keeping it up. Anytime you can work out in a group, you will get much better performance from it because there's accountability there. It's tough to always be responsible enough to get your butt out of bed and get dressed and get outside and go for a run. But if you've got a group of people that will let you know when you're not doing your job well enough and harass you and guilt you into being there, you will do it and you will get the benefit from it. So getting involved in some sort of a group program is very good. Plus, we see that more than any other thing that you can do for your health, what extends life the most? Social interaction. And we're getting less and less of that in this digital age, aren't we? Starting with a good morning ritual. Pick what you want. You can spend the time reading, you spend the time meditating, prayer, whatever you find is going to be the best fit for you. But starting your day with dragging your lazy butt out of bed and going through just a shower and a shave and that whole ritual there, it's not a great way to start your day. If you're just finally waking up by the time you're getting to the office, you're missing out on a lot of the performance that you could be getting out of your mind and out of your body. So start with getting performance in mind. Okay. One other major challenge that we've got happening to us here in the U.S. is that we have got a very bad misperception of knowing when we are healthy. So what do you guys think? I got a question for you. How do you know when you're healthy? Who thinks you can tell? How can you tell when you're healthy? What's that? When you're not in pain. Most common answer, if this was Family Feud, you just won the big prize, because that would be the #1 answer on the board. However, think about this. What if we talked about somebody who had had a heart attack? How would they have felt the day before the heart attack? Fine, right? Do you think there's any possibility they had a healthy heart one day and a heart attack the next? No way, right? So whether you're symptomatic or not a very reliable indicator of whether you're healthy or not. Instead, we want to be focused on function. How are things actually working within our body? So that's what we just discussed there in #1. #2, how about a situation? Can you think of any situation where you might feel terrible, feel awful, rotten, miserable, it's the worst I've ever felt, yet be very healthy? Anybody got an example? Food poisoning, absolutely. Not that getting food poisoning is healthy, of course, but getting it up and getting out of you. That's the healthy thing to do, right? If you put some spoiled food into your body, wouldn't puking your brains out be the absolute best thing you could do? Yet it would feel pretty rotten and miserable, wouldn't it? So symptoms are not a very reliable indicator, is the point of all that. So instead what we want is we want to actually measure our health. We want to be able to take some metrics of how are things doing long before we've got the symptoms to tell us things are not going the way that we would like. So on the chiropractic side of my practice, we've got something called the core score, where we can measure your nervous system in 3 different objective ways and come up with an overall rating of just the health of your nervous system. But in the Creating Wellness system, we've got something called the wellness quotient. We take 17 different measurements, 17 different metrics. It's the most complete, non-invasive health assessment you can get. Meaning we don't do blood draws, but we gather everything else you can get outside of that. And by the way, the reason we don't do blood draws is because what we find is that cholesterol is not really a very good predictor of whether you're going to have a heart attack or not. Blood pressure, not all that good of a predictor. Go on high blood pressure or high cholesterol medicine, and they will bring down your blood pressure, they will bring down your cholesterol, but they will not extend your life. You'll still die at the same age, just die with lower blood pressure or lower cholesterol. So we take 17 different metrics. From there, we come up with a number called the wellness quotient. This particular person scored 120. Anything over 100, and it goes up to 200, anything from 1 to 200 means that you are aging slower than your biological age. You're doing a good job. Anything under 100, you're aging faster than your biological age. You need to make some changes. And by having that number that you can track, that gives you a tremendous amount of power, meaning that you know if you start an exercise program, you're not going to necessarily see big changes in weight or how your clothes fit or your strength or anything like that quickly. It's going to take weeks, potentially even months, depending on how far along you are. But by being able to go back in and reassess with a Creating Wellness, we can see that, hey, look, there's been improvements. You went from an 80 up to a 95. You're moving in the right direction, even if you're not feeling it just yet. Think about this. Is there any other business out there that doesn't track statistics? Wouldn't it make sense to do the same with your health? So we start with a 14-day quick start meal. You are given all of the grocery lists, the recipes, the meal plans to get a nice quick boost going to your metabolism and to your weight loss goals or fitness goals, depending on what you're going for. During that Creating Wellness assessment, strength will be assessed in 3 different major regions. And from there, we will be able to assign a specific